Hi everyone. June has been to a really great start compared to the previous months, and we're just second week into the month, and we're already seeing the Indian startup ecosystem funding pick up steam. We have had large-sized fundraisers by Cred, Kisht, and MSME lending startup Flexi Loans, who have all raised more than $50 million. And along with that, there's a entire new enthusiasm for the upcoming Digital India Act, which will be replacing a 2 decade old IT policy in the country. Alongside that, we also have two new unicorns that emerged last week, which was PhysicsWallah and a cosmetics related Purplle. Crypto markets have been just crashing, they have been a free fall. There's a committee being set up by the government of India to curb on the fake information which has been distributed by marketing agencies. Alongside that, LXME was the first Indian startup to be featured in the official Platinum Jubilee Pageant Commemorative album. And Maharashtra is all set to launch a 200 crore rupees startup fund. So, welcome back to the Startup Operator Weekly Roundup. The Weekly Roundup is the show for people who want to stay updated with major developments of the Indian startup ecosystem. And if you're new to the podcast, please do subscribe and share it with folks you think they'll enjoy the show. Roshan, great start to the month of June. How has that been for you?
Yeah, fantastic. Good to do this live. I mean, we don't do this often enough, but it has different energy to it. I had the opportunity to talk to Mr. T. Koshi, who is the CEO of ONDC, last weekend. And hearing things from him firsthand was pretty amazing. I think ONDC is going to be like that UPI 2.0 movement for India altogether. See, what's special about India's internet penetration is the fact that it's monetizable, right? And that's due to UPI. Aadhaar took about 6 years to reach a billion. UPI, I think, took about 3 years to get to a billion transactions, and we're expecting that ONDC will, it'll happen at an order of magnitude faster, right? I feel it's like the logical next step. Also exemplifies India's tech-led policy making, right? Which is that, hey, how do you prevent monopolies? How do you have inclusive growth? These are questions that we're trying to answer through tech and not through regulation per se, right? So yeah, I mean, super excited about the future, man, I should say.
Yeah, and I think the new IT law which is coming in place, really excited to see what sort of changes that will bring in. The government is referring to the data protection bill, which has been in limbo for the past 3 years. And now the Minister of State and for Electronics and IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, has himself called out that the Information Technology Act of 2000 is dated. And right now we need a refresher on that. But having said that, considering we're dealing with internet over here, right? I think 5 years in the cyberspace feels like a century. So I'd love to understand from your side as to what do you think the government should keep a focus on as we are, drafting this bill, because this needs to take into mind all sort of innovation that's not only happening today, but also the things that will come up in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so it has to be sufficiently broad based, right? I mean, because anytime you get too specific on these matters, innovation comes and smacks you in the face, right? I mean, pretty much that's what happens. So the IT Act, as the minister has mentioned, is pretty dated, 25 years old. It was originally designed to sort of regulate IT services and so on. It wasn't designed for product ecosystems. It wasn't designed for the startup and digital action that we see today. We've seen plenty of developments, right? I mean, we have been rather tactical on this front. You saw, TikTok and plenty of those apps being banned, for example, a couple of years back when India China's skirmishes started happening. And then you've been hearing about this data protection bill that's going to come up. And then you hear about the e-commerce regulations and so on. Now, all of these have been happening in silos. I do believe that given the population level digital initiatives that we have coming up, I mean, I just mentioned ONDC and so on, it's very important for us to have a Digital India Act. It'll be interesting to see, the range and what exactly this will cover as such. Those, I mean, I think will be interesting to understand, but it's definitely a need, I would say, right? Because we've had entrepreneurs on the podcast earlier who develop stuff in nascent categories. And one thing that has stood out, one thing that they've all said is that regulatory clarity in these spaces is always a plus. They would love to work along with the government or the policymakers and understand what the guardrails are, because they don't want to be in a position where midway, I mean, something like this changes and they have to sort of pivot their business, right? We've spoken about Policy Bazaar, for example, right, where the government kind of capped commissions on what brokerage these folks could charge and how their business became topsy-turvy overnight, right? Now, these kind of the externalities are very hard to deal with for a business. sense really, because God knows it's hard enough to get your product or marketing or tech or whatever else right. Dealing with this kind of stuff is hard. So yeah, I mean, regulation, I think, with the industry bodies in participation would actually serve everyone concerned really well.
So this whole the new Digital India policy, right, includes primarily four components. The first one is a data governance policy framework, which will be introduced to replace the very controversial draft India data accessibility and use policy. And I think the reason it came under a lot of scrutiny because it suggested that the government data could be sold to private sector. The second pillar is the cybersecurity policies and guidelines, which was introduced in 2013 after reports emerged that the US was spying on India. So this also could see a revamp. The Personal Data Protection Bill of 2019 was referred to a joint parliamentary committee who had submitted its report in December 2021, and a new draft bill will be introduced. And the last one is the proposed Digital India Act, which will be a renewed law to govern the entire digital ecosystem and the cyberspace in the country, which will be replacing the IT Act of 2000. So on the unicorn side, it's a good change that we have added two new unicorns to India's growing list. The first one being PhysicsWallah, who after a 100 million Series A fundraise became the seventh edtech unicorn in the country. Now, PhysicsWallah is already profitable, and they'll use the funds which they raised from Westbridge and GSV Ventures to launch content in 9 different vernacular languages. The company already has close to 1,900 employees, which include 500 teachers and 100 tech experts, along with 200 associate professors to answer student queries. We have been talking about how the likes of Khan Academy, the likes of Byju's and all, and over here we are seeing a fresh new name in the edtech space. So this shows that all the scrutiny that the edtech companies have been getting into, there's still positive signs which are actually emerging from it.
Sure. I had put out a thread on Twitter recently on EdTech specifically, right? And someone had said, hey, I mean, it's still a sunrise sector and you should be optimistic about it. I am definitely optimistic about EdTech, right? I mean, we've made the case plenty of times, all through 2021 that, online education is still 1-2% of the total education space in India. There's just a ton of headroom. And of course, there are healthy margins in terms of the business itself. And rather than grow through institutions, I think India will grow through innovation like this. So edtech, yes, I mean, there's very little not to be optimistic about, right? But if you look at the kind of inorganic growth that some of the larger folks in edtech have pursued, whether it's Byju's or Unacademy or whoever else, I just feel it's not sustainable, right? And you're starting to see the effects of that, right? I mean, we tried to explain, every roundup last year. I mean, we tried to explain, why it was a good idea for Byju's to perhaps acquire as many companies, right? I mean, I think they did about 12 or 13 acquisitions in the year. Unacademy did about 6 or 7 acquisitions in the year, and I was supremely puzzled that how are you going to corner supply in this kind of a market, right? I mean, how are you going to consolidate at all? Because it's not a winner takes all market. I mean, literally anyone with a working internet connection can start online coaching on Zoom, right? So it's not that kind of market. And what you will see is you will see the emergence of superstar teachers, and PhysicsWallah is a great example of that. And this is a 100 million Series A, which speaks about the sort of a healthy business metrics that they have to be able to raise that sort of a round in what seems to be a downturn, right? Yeah, I've heard Alec talk, on YouTube, and he is a character, right? I mean, he's a teacher himself. Started with physics coaching, comes from a very poor family, lived in a slum. His father had to sell his house and so on, right? Comes from that kind of a background. And so, I mean, his courses are extremely economically priced, right? I mean, 4 or 5 grand a course for the year, whereas, I mean, others perhaps charge around 40-50 grand. And in his own words, I mean, I think the funding is for him to sort of focus on some premium services, right? Where they can do a little more one-on-one sort of a coaching as such. And it's an interesting time, because edtech is not what it was 2 or 3 years back. Customer acquisition costs have gone up 3-4 times maybe, and there is also very deep discounting from all of the larger guys. So it's going to be a fight for sure. And literally everyone is kind of integrating downstream, right? I mean, they're going downstream. So having started at JE, I mean, they're all going down to 6th or 7th or 8th classes now. And with schools reopening right now, it's not going to be 100% of the market, right? I mean, which is what it seemed like in 2020 or so, when schools remained shut forever. So yeah, I mean, it is interesting times ahead for sure. A lot will depend on the execution. A lot will also depend on the kind of valuations and so on, right? See, because edtech is fundamentally a net profitable business, right? I mean, you get one person, you're basically, I mean, profitable at that unit level, right? And we've spoken about the margins, 50-60% margins. I mean, it is that kind of business, right? I mean, but like I was saying to someone, right? I mean, there is no business, in fact, there's no amount of money that you can raise if you're going to have valuations that require you to beat the laws of physics to support them, right? So well, it'll come down to execution, and I'm happy to see a different name in edtech for sure. I mean, and you're going to see plenty of these types, right? Plenty of these enterprising superstar teacher types.
Yeah, I'm also like something which I'm very interested to see edtech evolve is not only the traditional ways of offering courses, right? It's not like NCRT solutions and all, but rather more new different types of courses which are being influencer led. So, for example, if someone wants to learn about how to make YouTube videos, right? There'll be companies which will definitely come up which focuses on this whole millennial Gen Z sort of topics which they are after. That's something which I'm personally looking forward to. But the second unicorn from the week was Nika's rival Purple, who raised $33 million dollars in a Series E funding round. New investor Paramark Ventures led the round with participation from Premji Invest, Bloom Ventures, and Kedara. Purple has over 7 million monthly active users, over 1,000 brands, 60,000 products, and 5 private DTC companies. Now, the way the company was started was also very interesting. The founding trio, with who are Manish Taneja, who is the co-founder and CEO, Rahul Dash, who is the COO, and Suryansh Katyayani, who is the CTO, was all set to establish a company. But I think for a long time they debated whether to enter the furniture space or fashion. And the decider between these two categories was that while furnitures needed a comparatively higher initial investment, fashion was a segment which already had players like Mintra and Jabong, and they had a great early start, and there was competition coming in between them. So it made sense for the founders to enter this space, and today they have grown almost like head on to Nika's checking some of the stats. But I still remember the first time we had a D2C founder for an interview during the podcast. Since then, I started tracking the D2C space a bit more closely, and it's great to see the number of brands that are emerging. And on top of that, there's a whole ecosystem being created to enable D2C e-commerce.
Yeah, for sure. Nika had a blockbuster IPO last year. I mean, they're down to about 1400 levels. So depending on whether you're long Nika or not, I mean, you can buy up a little more of that. Right? None of this is financial advice. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting space, beauty, fashion, and commerce in that segment basically, because ultimately what we will see is that all of these kind of aggregator brands will have their own sort of vertical, setup, right? They will have their own cell phone brands which offer higher margins, and they're catering to a different segment of users that are not catered by the larger brands, right? We don't hear of any Lakmes or even Sephora's right now. And the interesting thing will be when one of these folks perhaps internationalizes, right? And perhaps goes into Asia and other parts in Asia and the US or Europe. I mean, that will be something to behold for sure, right? Very interesting. Two unicorns this week, and both in different segments, and both that are really fantastic spaces to be in, I would say.
So, in other news, to protect consumers from being victims of exorbitant claims which from advertisers, especially from the edtech and cryptocurrency space, the government is planning to bring in some sort of regulations into this. They want to streamline guidelines on promotional claims which these companies make to offer relief to the consumers as well as for the companies that are affected by these fake reviews. The Ministry of Consumer Affairs has formed three different panels to form these guidelines and FAQs on cryptocurrencies, edtech companies, and fake reviews, which have become so prevalent on e-commerce platforms. Rohit Kumar Singh, who is the Secretary of Ministry of Consumer Affairs, the committees have been formed with inputs from all industry stakeholders. So we have e-commerce industry stakeholders like companies, ASCII, which is the Advertising Standards Council of India, industry bodies like CII, FICCI, and ASSOCHAM. Nearly 55% of the companies operating in India are suffering from some sort of fake reviews. Now we have been seeing how e-commerce has evolved. We just spoke about D2C, and even a couple of roundups back, we saw the role which blockchain will play in shaping up e-commerce as well. So these committees which are being set up, what are some of the things that they should keep in mind from our conversations with the founders in the space?
Long due, long view, I would say, right? Crypto ads, I mean, have been atrocious. Some of the ads that I've seen encouraging anyone with 10 rupees to buy crypto is just absolutely not done, right? I think there should be a modicum of reason being applied there, right? And especially when you look at other financial services, right? I mean, the mutual fund guys don't get to advertise the same way. The banks don't get to advertise the same way, right? But crypto has been operating out of that ambit, and it's very irresponsible to have those kind of ads as well, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened, right? I mean, Bitcoin, Ethereum falling by 40-50% over the last 5-6 months. I mean, any asset where every 3 or 4 years the value drops by 70-80%, you're going to have some kind of regulation to protect retail investors, right? Not everyone is going to have the capacity to hodl, right? Not everyone's going to have the capacity to buy the dip and so on. In fact, I know people who have lost a shit ton of cash. So, absolutely yes, and we definitely need regulation, and I really hope that the more saner minds within the crypto community work with the government rather than I mean just pass smart ass remarks on them, right? I mean, so I would really hope that these folks find a way to work with the government and set up decent guardrails, right? I mean, the government is not the enemy. I don't think that that having that sort of a pirate mindset of like, okay, we're going to exist outside the law works, right? I mean, not at any rate if we're going to scale it to population level innovation. So yeah, long due, I think, and good that the government is kind of looking at this.
But just a question love to ask you is that right now we are seeing all the crypto assets are in the red ledgers, right? Prices have been coming down drastically, and many folks on Twitter are stating that hey, this is related to the current global inflation that we're seeing. How far do you think that is true? Is the crypto index related to the sort of the liquid markets that we're seeing right now?
See, it was supposed to be a hedge against inflation, right? I mean, if you look at originally the promise of Bitcoin and all of these things, but then what you're seeing is that it's become just another asset, right? It goes up and down when the stock market goes up and down, basically, right? When people had enough cash, and look, 2020, 2021 were extraordinary times, right? I mean, I keep saying 40% of all the dollars were printed in the last couple of years. No, those are extraordinary times. And so, which is why, I mean, people bought all kinds of shit, right? I mean, whether it was Doge or Luna or whatever else. And, living in that sort of a mindset that, okay, this is the panacea for all the ills in the world is not going to help, right? I've often said that I believe in the fundamental innovation in crypto, right? I mean, being able to validate a transaction on the internet is invention of wheel kind of a innovation, right? I mean, it's such a fundamental innovation. But I feel that being blinded by all of this price action is just hurting the crypto community, right? Really hurting the crypto community, because people have lost money. I mean, and it's real money, right? I mean, when you're asking the guy on the road to invest every 10 rupee he has on crypto, right, not knowing whether he has a savings account or an FD or a mutual fund, or he invests in equity and whatnot, right? I mean, that's not the same as putting 1% or 2% of your money in crypto and watching it soar over a weekend, right? I mean, it's not the same thing. So yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be better perspective on this, right? And if you look at the really smart folks, they're not the ones making all of this noise around around this, right? I mean, they're the ones who understand that for anything that has to scale, you need to take the government along with you, right? And some innovation, I mean, some regulation is always helpful. It'll weed out the bad apples from the good ones. So yeah.
So yeah, it reminds me of an interesting section which Morgan Housel had written in his book Psychology of Money. It took close to 100 to 200 years for mankind to understand how money works. In this journey, when stock markets actually came into place, we tried to master that in a span of 40 to 50 years, right? And even today, we are only taking learnings from what's happening and not really being able to predict the future or how the markets will react. Crypto being the latest form of asset is barely a decade old, and we are still acting like we're all pundits and gurus, and we can actually predict
No, we
how these
don't
things
know.
are gonna.
See, the thing is that even when I say that you have to have some perspective, I mean, we don't know how it's going to pan out, right? I mean, you don't know how it's going to pan out 10, 20, 30 years later, right? Bitcoin may really end up being that hard asset like real estate or gold or whatever else. It may very well, right? But the fact is that over the last 10 or 15 years, I mean, you are seeing that every 3 or 4 years, right, 70-80% of the value gets wiped out. So does that call for regulation or not? I mean, hell yes, it calls for regulation, right? You don't want your retail investors getting screwed. So yeah, that's that.
So talking about governments being involved with cryptos and the startup ecosystem as a whole, Maharashtra will be launching a 200 crore rupees fund to invest in deep tech startups from the state, and these startups would be led by women and will be socially relevant. This Maharashtra Innovation and Technological Development Fund will be a corpus for early stage startups from the state and will be led by Manisha Verma, who is the principal secretary for Skills, Employment, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Department. They already have a slew of vehicles to make equity investments in startups, which have been launched in association with finance players who are experts in the specific domains. And this includes the 120 crore Maharashtra Social Venture Fund, which is managed by the Small Industries Development Bank of India, a 330 crore rupees Maharashtra State Defense and Aerospace Fund, and 80 crore rupees fund for entrepreneurs hailing from marginalized community, and these are managed by IDBI Capital. Now, we have seen Karnataka launch some similar initiatives in the past. Even Andhra Pradesh has set up a whole innovation hub in the country. And it's good to see that the government is actively taking a part into not only enable startups, but also to attract foreign investments as well. And I think this will be very relevant for us to achieve that 100 unicorn marks that Mr. Nitin Gadkari had commented earlier this year. So that seems a very attainable goal right now.
Yeah, I mean, see, 200 crores in the larger scheme of things means precious little from a government expenditure perspective. But then, I mean, it could really make the difference for seed startups, and especially for, if you are looking at marginalized communities and so on, right? So I think it's definitely a net positive. I would say there should be more risk capital for people to start businesses and employ people and bring new innovation to the market for sure.
Also, in one of the firsts, Lakshmi, which is India's women first financial startup, has been featured in the official Platinum Jubilee Pageant Commemorative album, which was released in the honor of Queen Elizabeth II's 70-year commemoration. This album was launched on June 5th as part of UK's 4-day bank holiday weekend of Jubilee celebrations. Lakshmi is named after the Hindu goddess of wealth, Lakshmi, and is a women first financial platform which is aimed at reducing financial gender disparity. The startup was founded in mid 2020 and was aimed at simplifying money matters for women. Its founder, Preeti Rati Gupta, has led over 100,000 women towards building their financial acumen and financialization of small savings. Now, it's really heartening to see that such startups which are solving the root causes of society actually being recognized on an international platform. And I think in the future we'll be seeing many more such companies coming to similar platforms.
Yeah, no, many positives about this. I mean, anything that adds to financial literacy is a big tick mark in my book, right? It's fantastic. Women have differentiated financial needs. I mean, they do have to plan slightly differently than men, and the fact that you have a community here to show each other the ropes, right? I mean, is fantastic. And I mean, I think they might have certain group buying schemes and so on and so forth. I suppose, right, which can come off as privileges for within the group. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely helpful.
Okay, so let's talk about the other fundraisers of the week. Cred has raised a $140 million round, which is a mix of primary and secondary funding, led by Singapore's Sovereign Wealth Fund GIC. The valuation zoomed to $6.4 billion with this fundraise. And on Thursday, NPCI, which is a subsidiary of NPCI Bharat Bill Pay, onboarded Cred as a key agent institution for providing easy bill payment solutions to its members. With this collaboration, Cred users will now be able to make recurring bill payments like electricity, telecom, DTH, education fees, and municipal taxes conveniently, very similar to how it happens on Google Pay and Paytm. Payments and lending fintech Kisht announced a funding round of $80 million on Wednesday, which was led by Vertex Growth and Brunei Investment Agencies. They also will be foraying into the credit backed cards with the launch of a millennial focused brand named Ring. And fresh funds will be used to enhance the product offerings for millennials and add other relevant financial products. Flexi Loans, which is a MSME focused fintech lending startup, secured $90 million in Series B funding round from investors that included the likes of Denmark based PE firm MAG Invest, UK based fintech investor Fasana Capital, and the family offices of Dr. Harry Banga and Yogesh Mahansaria, along with many existing shareholders. This investment makes Fasanara's Capital's first SME fintech investment in India and MAJ Invest's third investment this year. The capital raised will be utilized for technology development and to double the MSME book via its co-lending, BNPL, and other supply chain finance platforms. So this overall, this seems like to have been a very good week for fintechs in large in the country. Very interesting tweet you put out last week, right? And I wanted to talk to you about. The tweet reads that company culture isn't just what you reward, but also what you reject. The talented jerk who won't play nice with others. The second type is that senior exec who bulldozes his way through conversations. You tolerate this and you'll create 100 copies of that archetype as you scale, guaranteed. Can you take us through your thought process behind this?
Yeah, I had a whole thread on this. See, culture is something that people say that is very important, but they fail to kind of recognize how important it is when it breaks, right? And it doesn't break in, one giant creaking noise, right? I mean, it breaks a little bit. It breaks slightly in little moments, right? And it's very important to stay paranoid so that you detect these things. Very, very important, because oftentimes, I mean, in general, I mean, not a lot of us are tuned to handling conflict. We're overall very agreeable people, and we strive to not have this in our lives. But it's important to kind of recognize when things break and do something about it, right? Because otherwise, I mean, it's just impossible to scale without a proper culture. I was saying this to a colleague as well, that look, I mean, if Microsoft employs a lakh plus people or Google employs a lakh plus people, it's not that they're finding those gems in the society and they're bringing in, and they're being wonderful human beings, right? I mean, it's not that. There is a certain sort of a civilizing force within Google or within Microsoft or within IBM or whatever those large organizations are, right? I mean, there is a sort of zeitgeist, there is a sort of cultural influence there, which conditions people into behaving the way they're expected to, right? And if they don't, I mean, they realize very quickly that they're in the minority and they move out. This is something that I think startups have to pay a lot more heed to. I have been on both as a founder and an early employee, I would say, right? I've gone to experience this firsthand, and anytime we have been blindly optimistic that things will take care of itself and that it'll get better, we've had to pay the price. It's just perhaps the single biggest challenge with scaling, single biggest challenge.
Right. So, folks who are listening to this, we would love to understand what have your experiences been as you scaled up your teams. So, do drop a comment regarding that, or you can write to us, or even drop us a message on social media platforms. But Roshan, before we end up the roundup for this week, let's talk about the conversations you have lined up. I believe you'll be talking to
I'll be talking to
you'll be
Kalpit
you'll be
of
talking to Kalpit
Netcore.
of Netcore, right? And how to take companies from just a startup to an IPO, and about drone revolution with Ankit Mehta, who is the CEO of Idea 4. So can you take us through what you have planned?
Both fantastic founders and businesses. So Netcore is a 25-year-old business, and it was earlier, I mean, it was part of India World, which is one of the early internet successes, right? I mean, they got sold for something like 100 million way back when to Sifi, I think, right, in 96 or 97, and then Netcore was hyped off from that. It's been a 25-year journey, and they operate in this whole customer engagement marketing automation space. It was fantastic to talk to Kalpit about various aspects of longevity, scaling the business, being relevant to the customer, and so on. I think they will probably IPO in 1 or 2 years time, and it's just a very interesting conversation for people to listen into. Ankit with Idea Forge has literally built the drone market in India. They started up 15 years back, I think, IIT Bombay. And I will be talking to him about what it takes to operate in a very nascent category, what it takes to build when there is no competition, and what it takes to develop use cases and acquire customers for a brand new innovative technology, right? So that should be a fun conversation as well. Yeah, two very, very good conversations coming up. Let us know if you guys want us to talk to founders, operators, investors in the Indian startup ecosystem, anyone else who we should have. I mean, we'd be happy to reach out to them and have them on the podcast, and plus we'll give you a shout out as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you have any questions for the guests we have upcoming on the show, you can send them as a tweet to us. Just tag at Operator Startup on Twitter or the Startup Operator on LinkedIn. Along with that, be the first ones to know when we have content coming out. Do subscribe to our WhatsApp newsletter. You can get the link on the description of this episode, as well as if you like and review the episodes on your favorite podcast platforms. It really helps more people like you to discover our content, and we can create a more engaging community. So with that thought, we come to the end of this week's roundup. Hopefully the next week of June will be much better than the previous two, and we'll have a lot more topics to discuss. So until then, have a great week ahead, and we'll see you again next weekend.
Happy Monday, guys. Have a great week ahead and stay optimistic.